Good morning, everyone. Let me spend a few minutes talking about 6G research at the European level. So maybe I can start by giving a little bit more background about who I am and where I'm coming from. So I am chairman of the board of an organization called the 6G IA, and we try and represent European industry in all things 5G and 6G. And when we talk about European industry, we don't just mean the big players. We don't just mean Nokia and Ericsson and Deutsche Telekom. We also have major players from other parts of the world, Samsung, Docomo, Intel, Apple. So we have quite an ecosystem of the major players, but we also have the SMEs and the academics, the universities, and the research institutes. So we try and have a complete ecosystem within our organization so that we can develop positions for Europe in cellular technology. And one of the main things we actually do is, together with the European Commission, we run research programs. So, interesting. One of the research programs we've been running for the past few years is called 5G PPP. So this is a public-private partnership. So it was put together by the European Commission, which is the public side, and the 6GIA, which was the private side. And this has been running since sort of 2014, 2015, and we've run nearly 100 projects over the last 7 or 8 years. And this has been broken down into 3 main phases. So the first phase was very much looking at fundamental 5G technology, the building blocks. And in the telecoms world, we have this wonderful habit of first we define a name, and then we define what that name will be. We did the same with 3G and 4G and 5G, and we're doing the same with 6G. So we have the name, but exactly what it means, we don't know. And this first set of projects, it got a lot of the key players together to discuss what the key technology building blocks might be. And indeed, if you look at the results, the key concepts coming from that first set of projects, a lot of those are what we now know as 5G. A lot of that fed into standardization. Hundreds of contributions to standardization in 3GPP. But we wanted to go beyond that. And then in the phase 2, the key thing which is perhaps new in 5G is this idea of taking that technology and applying it beyond the classical telecoms domain, beyond the teenager with the smartphone, trying to really find new markets and at the same time digitize new industries. And that's what we focused on in this second phase, where we had many, dozens and dozens of trials with new, what we call vertical industries, which are different domains to telecoms, be that automotive or smart city or smart agriculture or healthcare. In all of these areas, we've worked together with the key players. Why? Because each of these areas is their own world. They have their own development, their own standardization. They have their own way of doing things. And it's different to ours, the telecom way of doing things. And if we wish to be successful, if we wish our technology to be applied there, then we need to understand both worlds and work together. And that's what these projects provided. The chance to come together, the key players on both sides, to discuss with each other, to understand each other's world, and then trying applying this forming 5G technology and learning about where it works well and where we need additions. And we are now seeing in release 18 for 5G that we are now adding new features. And many of these features are coming from these trials that we have tried with these various vertical industries. And then in the last phase, which is still ongoing to some extent, we wanted to build innovation platforms, so a chance for new players to try out new ideas in 5G. So we have 5G platforms which were typically cross-border, so across several countries, and where new, typically small companies or SMEs could try their ideas, see if they work, see if they scale. Now, why am I talking about a 5G when we're meant to be talking about 6G? I think the first point to make is that this is probably fairly similar to how we imagine doing 6G research. First starting off with the fundamental building blocks, and then looking at how we apply that and gradually building up the system. But secondly, in this last phase, this phase 3, we had an extra part, an extra call, which wasn't aimed at 5G. It was aimed at trying to bridge between 5G and 6G. Indeed, bridging between this research program and the next research program that I will talk about today. So this set of projects, the so-called ICT 52 projects, there were actually 10 of them. These were a set of projects that were started several years ago, explicitly looking at bridging that gap to 6G technology. And maybe to pick out one, we have in the middle there the HexaX project, which you might have heard of. It's the European flagship project for 6G. And that has developed or brought together a lot of the ideas in Europe and successfully disseminated that around the world. So we started fairly early with 6G research, and we have clearly some results which we can show, but this is clearly only the first step in the journey. As part of that first step, as something which HexaX has certainly been involved in, but others as well, we have this vision document, which is available, and the link is here. And this tried to then bring together the European view of what 6G should be, tried to bring together what the requirements are, what the key features or parameters we need when we look for designs and solutions. So let me move on to the new program, a purely 6G program. It's called 6G Smart Networks and Services Joint Undertaking, which is a very long name. But fundamentally, it's another research program. It's another partnership between the public and the private side. Again, the public side is the European Commission. The private side is the 6GIA. And the intention is to invest at least 1.8 billion euros over the next 7 to 8 years. So quite a lot of money. And we are just about to start that first set of projects. So now is a great time to talk. And we are just about to announce the call for the second round of projects. So maybe taking a step back to begin with, what are we actually trying to achieve with this Smart Network and Services partnership? What are the goals? What was the rationale for the funding from the public side? Well, unsurprisingly, one of the key things we're trying to do is research and innovation in the 6G area. And that's very much analogous. It's very similar to what we plan to do in the previous program with 5G. But there are clear differences. And the differences are to do with the nature of 6G. 5G was, if we're honest, mainly radio focused. And it was, in some ways, an evolution of 4G. It was a fairly, perhaps more evolutionary than revolutionary. We're not sure that's true of 6G. And in 6G, we believe that there will be many new key technologies which are baked in, which are more fundamental when we develop this technology. So if we look at things like AI, if we look at cloud, if we look at some aspects of resilience and security, we believe we need to bring those into the picture to start with. So when we consider the scope of this smart network and services, it's a far larger scope of research areas we need to be looking at. We need to be looking at AI. We need to be looking at IoT. We need to be looking at cloud. We need to be looking at big data. We need to bring all of that in so that we get the right solution for 6G. And equally, we shouldn't just be looking at the radio. Maybe 6G isn't so much to do with radio. Maybe there is a new radio, but maybe there are more important aspects, service aspects, application aspects, virtualization, cloudification. So we need to really take an end-to-end view. So that means we need to not just look in terms of the base station, the network side, we also need to consider the devices and indeed the applications. And these new applications will also be part of what we're doing. So we'll be looking at some of those exciting new areas, holographic type communications, digital twins, some of these things. They're also part of what we need to look at. So it's a very broad area. Clearly, there is an aspect of trying to retain some of the leadership position that Europe has in telecommunications. We have clearly 2 of the 3 major vendors there with Ericsson and Nokia, and clearly it's not something we'd wish to lose. No region or country wishes to reduce its economic power. So that's clearly a consideration. But in actual fact, the next one where we say safeguard European values is perhaps more important and perhaps a little bit strange to see in a research program. Values. But what this means is there are a certain set of values which are shared amongst the European 26 or 27 countries. And I would suggest are also shared with Korea and certain other key players. And that's to do with personal liberty, protection of data, security. And I think we take those issues far more seriously than some other global players. And if we don't bake that into the technology, if we don't support that in the technology, the ability to protect personal data, the ability to give privacy, then it won't be there. And I think the example we can all see is the internet today, where clearly personal data isn't protected, and we have, we've all seen the scandals with people accessing other people's data and all things like that. So this is one of the things we wish to do. We wish to make sure that 6G supports those values that we have in terms of personal security and privacy. And clearly, as these digital networks become more and more important, it's not just about telecoms in isolation. It's about using that as a driver for the whole digital economy. So by digitizing these other industries, we provide those with process improvements. They become more competitive, more productive, and there is a commercial advantage. So clearly we need to try and not just create this technology, but apply this technology to these other areas and show the advantage. And in addition to purely commercial issues, there is the issue of the social issues. And I think we're all aware of the problems of the green transition, the reduction of carbon, increasing prices of energy. We have a lot of major issues that we need to deal with, the urbanization of society, the aging of society. A lot of these things need some sort of critical infrastructure to get a handle on, to be able to actually have some sort of solution. And that's what we hope we can also do with 6G. So a lot of things we're trying to achieve. Some of them we will, some of them we won't. But that gives a sort of higher level view of what we're trying to achieve. This next slide is very busy and probably very difficult to read even from the front, and I apologize. All I'm trying to say is that we have a very large area that we're trying to cover, many, many research topics that fall within the scope of what I just described. And you'll see it goes all the way from sort of the applications and application framework at the very top, all the way down to the physical layer. And at all of these, there are exciting questions which we need to look at. Especially when we look at things like AI, which now is not something we just sort of sprinkle on the top like sugar on a cake. It's something that needs to be baked in. It will be part of that infrastructure. AI will be a mechanism used within 6G to make it better, but also a service that it can provide. Okay. If we look at the sort of high-level timeline, you'll see that in some ways it's fairly similar to what we did in 5G, how we imagine this program will run. So in this first phase is very much exploratory. And maybe again, I need to point out that today we're talking about 6G and how wonderful 6G will be. And that's fine. But if you are looking for a technology used today, or indeed tomorrow, that technology is 5G. So 5G story is not over. And this is a point we need to make quite forcefully, that 5G still is at the beginning of its story. We're just starting with 5G Advanced. 5G will be the key technology right into 2030 and beyond. So please don't write off 5G. Why do I say this? That the problem is we're saying that one of the things we wish to do with 5G and indeed with 6G is bring this technology to new industrial domains. And the danger is these new industrial domains don't know our world. And if they start hearing 6G, 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 they'll say, oh, well, I won't do anything now. I'll wait for 6G and do something with that. And that would be, in my view, the wrong solution. We need to try and have the dialogue, the trials, the understanding of both sides as soon as possible. And there we can use 5G. Even if 5G isn't the final solution, it's a very good stepping stone. And as was said yesterday, so often when we try and use this technology in new areas, be that for data or mobile internet or now going into verticals, it takes time. Perhaps it takes 20 years, as was suggested yesterday, to really get it working well. So we're beginning that story, but the story begins with 5G. So 5G is a technology of today, and indeed all the way up to 2030. We shouldn't forget that. Having said that, we need 10 years to develop these systems. These systems are incredibly complicated, and they need that time from the first research to the first deployable systems that actually work. So equally, even though 5G is a technology of today, we do need to have a dialogue and we do need to start the research on 6G. And that is what this is saying to some extent. It's saying now is the time for this exploration. We don't know what 6G is. There are some ideas, as you have seen yesterday and today, but nothing is fixed, nothing is defined. Standardization hasn't started. Standardization won't really start till probably 2025. So now is the time to look at what could be those solutions. This is something where we can work together to try things out and see what actually will work. Once we have those first concepts and ideas, then the second phase will be trying to put some of these pieces together and also look a little bit more into the business cases, the business rationale. It's great having wonderful ideas, and no one likes a PowerPoint slide more than me. But that doesn't sell something and it doesn't deploy something. And these networks are hugely expensive. So we need a business reason for all these networks. We need a business reason for 6G. And that's something that will hopefully develop over time. Hopefully we'll find new applications which are compelling. Or possibly it would be more about KPIs like energy efficiency and sustainability that will be a justification in their own right. And then lastly, we need to look at putting the system together, optimizing, and then looking at the next step, what happens with the evolution of 6G. So we have a lot of plans. But we have at least started. So this first call, this first set of projects for smart networking services, they have now been selected. So we have 36 projects which have been selected, talking about somewhere around 240 million euros of public funding. And they will start beginning of next year. So it'll be a large set of projects then starting. And this is, if you will, the first major step in this new research program. Equally, hopefully, next month we will release the call for the next set of projects. And then a year later, the next set. So we have a series of calls for projects which have now started, and Smart Networking Services is up and running. So in summary, certainly looking at Smart Networking Services, we have completed that first call, which is good. I think we have a strong portfolio of projects. We will be starting that as was said, starting next year. We have created the work program for the next call that will be released in December. We have also, I think we can say, successfully mobilized the European ecosystem. By that, what I mean is within this first call, there was something like 700 organizations that applied for funding. And if you look at the number of organizations involved in creating these work programs, it's also around 800 to 1,000 organizations that are involved in that preparation. So that's quite a major stakeholder group. But I put European, but as was said, it goes beyond Europe. We have major players from Korea, we have major players from Japan, from the US. So it is a melting pot where a number of different views and opinions come together. And maybe that's the greatest strength or legacy of such programs. They are a chance for many actors, both within Europe and beyond Europe, to come together and discuss what 6G should be. Equally, what's important is international collaboration, and that's really why I'm standing here today. 6G will not be defined by any one region or country. And we truly believe that we should be aiming for a global 6G standard. And to do that, we need the dialogue early. We need to agree what are the key technologies. We need to agree what the timeline is. And the best way of doing that is clearly collaboration. I've had some very interesting discussions over the last few years, last few days, sorry, not last few years. And I think there's clearly a will on both sides in Korea and in Europe to have a collaboration. I think we can make this happen. And I think it's an important step trying to go for that one global 6G standard. So I welcome working together, and I hope we can successfully create the 6G that we need and want. Thank you.